Look, thanks for everyone who's turned up for this presentation. And look, we're recording this so that we'll be able to share this with anyone who isn't able to make it. What I've done is I've put a presentation together, and I've molded it around the questions that have come back. And hopefully it answers all the questions that did come back. And look, in the event that I haven't answered them, look, there's an opportunity at the end to answer any other questions. So look, give me one sec here. My name is Sami Dowling, so I work with the ladies and men's first team in Pembroke. I've just put this slide here just to give you a bit of a background as to, I suppose, who I am and who I've worked with. And I've been involved in strength and conditioning over the last 15 years. And I've worked with a couple of different rugby teams, GA teams, and I've been involved in hockey then over the last 5 or 6 years as well. I would have spent most of my time over the last 15 years initially working with the IRFU and Leinster Rugby. And then I suppose in the GAA world, I've spent a little bit of time working with Dublin football, with Down, with Longford, and then recently Wexford as well, and have continued to stay involved at club level, both kind of as a consultant with rugby clubs and more hands-on with the GAA world at club level, and then also within hockey, having worked with Pembroke now over the last 4 years. And then I suppose my full-time roles outside of working with teams, would have spent a couple of years working with APEC as Director of Athletics Performance and Sports Science, and also tutored on their educational courses, and then have just recently teamed up and have started working as Director of Fitness with Fuse Fitness Clubs. So I very much live and breathe health, fitness, and strength and conditioning. And hopefully you'll be able to see that in this presentation, and that the answers that I'm given to the questions that you've asked is very much evidence-based and also applicable in the at amateur level and at club level, and is very much realistic. I've attached my email address there, so if anyone ever wants to ask me any further questions, please don't hesitate to do so. And I've also just attached 2 Instagram pages where I tend to put a fair bit of content, so don't hesitate to follow and share and absorb any information you can from those Instagram pages as well. So the questions that came back very much were about nutrition and some advice and guidelines on nutrition for training and playing. Training then as well, particularly with a focus on what can we do over the next couple of weeks, what we can to train in a team setting, and then some questions around how can we stay motivated during this lockdown phase. So when it comes to food and nutrition in and around training, so pre and post training, question I do get asked quite a lot is what should I be eating? And it's not really an easy question to answer because it depends. It depends on what have you eaten since the start of the day. So just focusing on what you eat just before training or just after training isn't necessarily bad, but the context is very important. So what are you eating throughout the day, and that very much should shape around then what you would have before and after training. And if we try and break this down and think about energy balance and energy consumption, so at the end of the day, we expend calories and we need to take in calories to match that expenditure. And then furthermore, our calories are broken down into what we call macros, which is fats, proteins, and carbs. And how much we eat of fats, proteins, and carbs will very much dictate the quality of our energy output as well as our recovery. So if we just focused on someone who wants to maintain their body weight, okay, there's a range of protein, carbs, and fats that we can split amongst the calories that we take in that would support maintaining body weight. And then naturally, if we want to increase our muscle size, we would then have more carbohydrates. And then if we wanted to reduce some body composition or improve body composition, we would reduce carbohydrates and have more protein and fat in terms of the distribution of that. But what can help make that a little bit simpler is if we think about our body weight and then figure out how much protein and fats we need to eat and keep that constant every day. And there's some guidelines there, and that's how these very much work is in terms of guidelines. So you'll see with protein, the guideline is that you would have 1.6 grams to 2.2, 1.6 being the lower end and 2.2 being the upper end per kilogram of body weight. And I'll show you now how that would calculate with an example athlete. And then the same with fat. You definitely don't want to go any lower than 1 gram of fat, and we can go up to 1.2 and possibly a little bit higher. But if we focused on finding the point within what we would have in this range for our protein intake and our fat intake and keep that the same every single day, what we would then essentially change would be our carbohydrate intake. So the calories would fluctuate from day to day based on activity level. And if we try and either increase or decrease our carbohydrates, it makes it much easier to control that and regulate that. So a non-training day would be a day where we would have the least amount of carbohydrates in the week, and then naturally we would have the least amount of calories. A moderate training day, for example, the second session in the week, which is less intense than the first, would have a little bit more carbohydrates and as a result, more calories. And then the highest intense training day of the week, which is generally and typically would be the first training session of the week. So that's either Monday or Tuesday. And then also your game day. That'll be the day where you'll consume the most amount of carbs. But again, to try and simplify that, if we think about keeping our protein intake and our fat intake the same every day, all that would then separate, non-training days, light, moderate, or heavy, would be how much carbs we have, and that's how we would increase our calorie content. And that's a really easy concept then to stick with. To give you an example of that, if we have a 65-kilogram player, and we're looking at a high training day, okay, so the first training session of the week or a game day, their body weight multiplied by these guidelines would give them a range of carbs, which goes between 390 and 650, protein between 104 and 143, and then fat between 65 to 78 grams. Then if we break that down into 4 meals throughout the day, that would mean we would ideally need to then have 100 grams of carbs at each meal to kind of hit in around that lower end, 40 grams each meal to hit in and around a middle end here. And then we would distribute our fat between 20 grams during our first meal and then 15 throughout the following 3. Now, this is again an example, and there are many variations from this, but it's just to give you a little bit of context as to it's not just about what we have, say, before training. That will very much be dependent on what we're planning to have after, as well as what we've had before. Based on these kind of macros in this example, that day's worth of food could look as follows. A sample breakfast could look like having a bowl of porridge with some milk, adding in a little bit of vanilla quark to boost the protein content, and some honey to sweeten it. A cinnamon bagel with a little bit of jam, some fruit juice, cup of coffee, and that'll give you a macro breakdown of quite a lot of carbs at the front end of the day, which I always find is quite easy. If you have a high carb day, some athletes will struggle to distribute that throughout the day, and I find getting a large kind of dosage of carbs at the start of the day helps with that. So this sample breakfast here gives you just short of 150 grams of carbs, 40 grams of protein, and 10 grams of fat. A sample lunch here, having our kind of microwavable rice, which is really convenient, a chicken burger, some broccoli, some carrots, and some high protein yogurt will give you, again, 100 grams of carbs, 50 grams of protein, and 15 grams of fat. Then when it comes to post training, and I'm going to just slide across to the next one, this very much depends on whether you're a type of athlete who likes to have your dinner before training. Alternatively, you can have this after training. And if you're going to have this after training, it is still important that you have a pre-training meal then that's slightly smaller, because we run the risk of, if we have a lunch at around, say, 1 o'clock, we're training anywhere between 6 to 8 o'clock, and we don't eat anything between 1 and training, and we only have a dinner afterwards, we can run the risk of feeling very lethargic and fatigued quite early on in the session, because it's been quite a large amount of time before we supplied ourselves with some energy. So if you like having a larger meal before training, my suggestion is as follows. One, give at least an hour and a half between that meal and when training takes place. Try make sure that that meal is low enough in fiber, because fiber will slow down the digestion, and try and limit the having spicy food before training. So this kind of meal, which is perfectly fine to have before training or after training, will consist of some spaghetti, some meatballs, a bit of fruit juice, a side salad, and some rice snacks. And again, that'll give us 100 grams of carbs, 50 grams of protein, and 15 grams of fat. And then if that meal is going to be had after training and you still need a small snack before, or alternatively, you've had your large meal before training, it's still important to have something small after training. And that can be something small, like having some cereal with some milk, some fruit, so a small cup of fruit, some rice cakes with a little bit of nut butter. And again, that'll give us 100 grams of carbs, 50 grams of protein, and 20 grams of fat. Now, I must stress again, if you've joined us late, this sample daily meal I've just given you here, just to go back, is based on a high training day, okay, where we are looking to considerably boost our calories, or a significant amount of our calories are coming from carbohydrates. That is not something I would advise you would do every single day, because naturally that would only work well if your calorie expenditure is that high. But we know that during a high intensity training day, our calorie expenditure is going to be higher. So it's important that we supply that with a high calorie intake. A question I then get asked quite a good bit, particularly with training late in the evening or at nighttime, and then having to eat afterwards. And the reason a lot of players refrain from eating after training is because they feel that, you know, eating carbs late in the evening will mean that the food that I eat, or the carbs that I eat, is turned to fat. That is not true. It's not possible to do that. Okay, it all just comes down to energy balance. So the energy that you take in and the energy that you expend. Okay, so, you know, in theory, you could expend 3,000 calories a day, have 1,000 calories in the early part of the day, eat 2,000 calories after your training session at night, and you won't put on weight, because your energy balance matches your energy intake. So it is important to remember that. When it comes to game day nutrition, this one is, there's a lot of variety and there's a lot of I suppose nuances with this. So some players like to and can comfortably eat quite a lot on game day, and some players can't. But what I suggest is keep your breakfast the same, and try have a dose of or source of carbohydrates anywhere between 1 to 3 hours before the game. Okay, and choose foods that are palatable, practical, and cost effective. The reason that's important is that we want to be able to make sure that if you're on the road and you're going to be on the road for a couple of hours, that you can replicate what you have in that 3 hour window before a game the same way that you would if that game was at home. And that kind of carbohydrate source, anywhere from, you know, 1 to 3 hours before the game, can be as simple as just having 2 to 3 slices of toast with some jam, or a fruit smoothie. You know, it's all about really keeping it very, very simple. And hydration is also very important. So there's a little formula here which helps to try and individualize how much fluid you need per day based on your body weight. So it's 45 to 50 mils per kilogram per day. So again, a 65 player there would have 3.2, or just a little over 3 liters of fluids. Now, it is important to remember that this is fluids as a whole. This doesn't mean 3.2 liters of water. So anything that's a fluid counts there. And you want to sip on fluids throughout the day consistently, rather than taking large doses. Because again, if we have those large doses of fluids, what ends up happening is we feel quite bloated, and then we need to go to the toilet quite often. And coffee in moderation is okay. So coffee does not cause dehydration as long as we kind of stick to in and around, or just in around that 4 cups a coffee day. Anything going over there, you know, potentially could cause dehydration. But you'll see from this study here that anything up to 4 cups of 200 mils a day does not result in the change of total body water, compared to if you just had the same amount of water compared to coffee. So hydration during a game is also very important. And sometimes we can forget about that because of the intensity and the adrenaline. We want to try and have carbs throughout the game if we can, as well as just water, because that helps replenish energy much quicker because we get that through the source of glycogen. And a 6% solution of carbohydrate is ideal, and that's what you'll see in your energy drinks. Okay, so your Powerades and your Lucozades, but you can also use a more cost-effective version like your cordials. But just make sure if you go for the cordial option that you get the one that has sugar in it. So don't get the one that says no sugars, because then you're not getting the carbohydrates. It's important that for in-game carbohydrate uptake that we do get sugars. And if we sip on 100 mils and try and do that every 10 minutes, we're getting that constant supply, which just avoids this sudden rush if it dissipates. Because once glycogen is gone, okay, from our muscles, that's when we just run the risk of actually getting cramps, okay. And you find that in your calf muscles quite a lot as well because of the restricted little bit of blood flow that you have there with your shin guard. So by sipping away on fluids, and ideally a little bit of carbohydrates within that, every 10 minutes, you avoid or you reduce the risk of that happening. So a little bit of strategy when it comes to planning your meals throughout the week can really help go a long way. Because again, it's not just about what we have just before or after training. If we can plan ahead, this little planner can help really well. So on Sundays, we want to start thinking about doing our weekly shop for the kind of essential foods that we need and focus on recovery, okay? Particularly if you've had a game the day before, and have a treat as well. You know, just it's all about balance here. On Monday, start your week if you can with a fish dish, because I know a lot of athletes that I've talked to don't eat a lot of fish. So if you have very little fish in your diet, try and start the week with having a fish dish. Okay, and try make a batch of protein bars. I've posted some recipes before on my Instagram page, and there's some on the Fuse training page as well. If you start making that batch early on in the week, you can then have them as a snack throughout the week. If Monday is that heavy training day, make sure that you increase your energy intake through fuel sources, and having a primer sometimes before training can help. And when I mean with primer, having coffee. Now, of course, if you're caffeine sensitive, I would urge that you don't drink coffee after lunchtime. But if you can tolerate a cup of coffee in and around that 3 o'clock mark with a bit of a snack, that can help act as a boost and a primer and a stimulus for that heavy training session that you'll have on the pitch early on in the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, try stock up on some fresh meat, fish, veg, and fruits. And this is when you would have kind of more lower carb intake on rest days or non-training days. On Thursday, start to plan kind of a carb loading meal that you'll have on the Thursday and Friday in the lead into your Saturday game. And you can increase carbs by simply having more oats if you have porridge for breakfast, or an extra spoonful or two of your rice, or an extra potato or two if you're having it with your dinner, or just sipping away on some fruit juice. Those are really simple strategies for increasing carbohydrate intake when you're carbo loading. It doesn't have to be like a specific, like singular heavy carb based meal. Spreading that out throughout the day sometimes is an awful lot more manageable. And try, if you do rely on caffeine on game day as a kind of a stimulus, try reduce it from Thursday and Friday, or if you can't even eliminate it, because it'll give you a real solid boost then on game day. Friday, top up your fuel stores with easy digest carbohydrate meals like your granola, your rice cakes, and really focus on hydration. And pre-game top up like what I've just suggested a couple of slides ago, and plan that ahead as well, and have moderate sized meals on game day. Even after the game, sometimes adrenaline is still really high after a game, so just kind of chipping away at meals is a really solid way of making sure we're balancing our energy expenditure, and again focus on hydration. And again, you'll see at the bottom just this, a simple little picture which shows the difference from your macros between how the distribution of carbs on non-training days versus training days, and keeping protein intake and fats very, very similar. So Next, we're going to talk about training. So one of the questions that came up in terms of how many days should we train, and what kind of distribution should that look like? And again, like when it comes to nutrition, it very much depends. It depends how active you are in your day. So if you've got a job that involves you being on your feet quite a good bit, and you're clocking up a lot of steps, that is someone then that may not need to train as much outside of their structured pitch days compared to someone who possibly isn't. And I know that's very much a challenge now with working from home. And if you use any, I suppose, if you use technology at all that counts steps or that looks at your activity levels, you probably have noticed a difference in the last couple of months if you're working from home compared to if you were based somewhere where you're in an office and you're walking around a lot. And we can counteract that quite simply by just having mini intervals where we're getting up, walking around, whether that be your house, your apartment, or even around your block. Again, as long as we're sticking within the 5 kilometer radius. But going out for just a 20-minute walk is a really simple way of making sure we're keeping active if we find that currently we're in a situation that we're not. It's also based on what your goals are. Are your goals performance based in terms of sport specifics, or are they health based? So that will all determine how many days per week you should train. But what I'll share with you next is a bit. It's kind of a general schedule or a typical schedule that the Lady Ones would follow, and not too dissimilar to the men's first team as well, whereby they'll do 2 pitch sessions and they'll have a game. They'll be given at least 1 gym session that I encourage them to do, and then they have options to do some off-feet conditioning in the middle of the week, and then another light gym session towards the end of the week, and then a recovery session the day after a game. So you'll see there's 7 days of activity, and that may well suit you, but that this may also not suit you. So it very much is going to depend on your training experience and how busy you are and what your goals are. But what's important to recognize that although there are 7 days of activity here, the intensity and the volume of that activity very much ranges from day to day, whereby you'll see the intensity is quite heavy at the start of the week, whereby we'll have the kind of most intense session early on in the week. And if we're going to do 2 gym sessions on either a Tuesday or a Friday, the more intense one, again, will be early on in the week. And this is to allow enough room to recover whilst we'll still do some work, so that our nervous system is recovered to perform on game day, because it's everything we do training wise has to, at the end of the day, support performance for the game. So you'll see that's optional there. That's optional. This one here is going to very much be based on fitness status. So if someone needs extra conditioning to help support and improve the performance on the pitch, they'll do it. If they don't, they may benefit from having a complete rest day. So it very much is the answer is very much it depends, but I wanted to show you what it could look like, and this is very scalable. And I must also stress that there are certain players who might do more than this. So there's players that follow this plan, there's players that do less, and there can be players that do more than this. And again, it all depends on their goal, their training status, and their experience, and how active they are during the day. It was a question that was also asked about strength training and strength as an S&C component for hockey and the importance around it. And why should we strength train even if we're not playing on the first team? And it's as important irrelative for what team you play on, because the effects of strength training are as follows. It increases our ability to produce force, so that means we get stronger, so our strength increases. It means you can increase muscle fiber size. Doesn't mean necessarily you get bulkier, but the muscle fiber size itself can increase, which is good because that helps improve our sports performance. There's a neural adaptation, which means we get an increase in motor unit recruitment, which is very important from a synchronization point of view. There's bone remodeling, and we get improved body composition. So we actually get better at utilizing fat as a source of fuel as well. We want to strength train to improve sports performance and sports potential. So that means our ability to sprint and to jump, and also to improve robustness, so tissue tolerance, which improves or it helps mitigate risk to injury, because unfortunately there's no such thing as reducing injuries altogether and injury prevention. There's no such thing really as injury prevention. We can't prevent injuries altogether, but what we can do is we can reduce the risk or mitigate the risk of them happening. And certain risk factors includes being stronger. So if we're stronger, we're at less risk of getting injured. And we also have a positive shift in our power output once we get stronger. So when it comes to thinking about strength training, we want to think about movement patterns first before we think about exercise. So we want to think about squatting patterns, because those are patterns that happen on the pitch, lunging patterns, hinging patterns, pushing, pull, twisting, locomotion, jumping and landing, because those are all movements that will take place on the pitch in some form or shape, or in some shape or form. So first thing we think about is movement patterns. And then when it comes to exercise selection, we want to make sure that our exercises are functional, okay, that we think of movements before muscle, and if at all possible, that they are ground-based exercises, because we perform our sport on the ground. Ideally, we want to have a full range of movements if we can. Now, there can be restrictions if we have either pre-existing injuries, or just as we get older, we may not be able to go through the same full range of movement, and that may not be necessary in certain aspects. But ideally, the further the range of movement, the more benefit. Free weight before machines, and we want to have a balance in our program between push and pull exercises, anterior chain and posterior chain, so front of the body and back of the body, and then knee dominant and hip dominant exercises. And again, don't forget, force production is key when it comes to wanting to get stronger. So load is important, as long as we do that safely. So what I want to talk to everyone next, because this question came up quite a good bit, is what can we do during this lockdown phase that will hopefully reduce the risk of injury, or minimize that risk factor when we go back to training. So I've got a couple of sessions here, and by incorporating the following types of sessions into your weekly schedule each week over the next 5 to 6 weeks, you can maximize your training stimulus and minimize the risk of injury during the lockdown period in a sensible manner, ensuring that you're getting a balance between straight line running and change of direction running, as well as speed endurance and aerobic endurance qualities. And it's important to have that range there. So the running based program is going to include 2 different types of sessions primarily. We're going to look at interval running that we want to perform during the lockdown phase. The energy system we're going to work here is going to be a blend of aerobic and anaerobic. But as the weeks go on, it'll become more aerobic. The duration of the reps are between 45 to 90 seconds. And once your reps are in and around that range, and we're working at the intensity of 70 to 90% of our max heart rate, then that is the energy adaptation we will get. And the benefits from doing this are to improve our VO2 max. We're going to get an enhanced anaerobic metabolism. And we only want to perform this when we have a solid aerobic base, which we have because we've already gone through a pre-season. So that's why it's perfectly fine to get straight into our interval training. And this is an interval running session that I've prescribed to the teams that I've worked with that you can utilize. And it's nice and simple. You'll see here with the diagram, you're going to run from baseline out to the 25-yard line and back, then to the halfway and back, and then to the far 25-yard and back. And we're going to operate on a clock here, and you're going to start each rep every 2 minutes. So the aim is to complete this rep in around 75 to 90 seconds. And again, there's a range there. Some will complete in 75 and some will go up to 90, okay? The moment you go over 90 is the moment I want you to kind of stop at that 90-second mark. And the intensity, again, I want you to operate under is the 70 to 90%. So there's a bit of a range there. But again, if we go over 90 seconds of activity with the recovery that I'm giving you, you're then going to go into a different energy system, which we don't want. So scale this as as needs be for yourself as an individual. Okay, so again, like I said, you get the remainder of that 2 minute mark as a recovery. So if it takes you 90 seconds to complete this and you're operating at that 70 to 90% intensity, that means you'll get 30 seconds rest before you go straight into your next rep. I want you to perform 4 reps back to back, and that includes 1 set. You get 3 minutes break, and then you perform another set. Okay, and the total distance per rep is 275 meters. Okay, so you're covering a little bit of volume. We're slowly building this up, and this session, after you've had a sufficient warm up, takes no longer than 20 minutes. So it's more than achievable to fit into a schedule. And it's important because not only are we taxing our aerobic capacity, you can see there's a few turns involved in this, okay, albeit at a kind of moderate pace. The turning aspect here and the number of turns is what's important as well, because you could, in theory, just run in a straight line for 75 to 90 seconds, operate at that intensity that I'm asking for, which is the 70 to 90%, and you would get an aerobic and anaerobic energy system adaptation. However, because you're not getting the turns, you then are it then becomes a risk factor when you return back to hockey, because once you go back to hockey training, you're going to be turning. So that's why I suggest doing this session here as opposed to just straight line running. The next session we're going to do is a repetition style session. So we're developing speed endurance, and this is where we are developing more of that anaerobic energy system. And to develop an anaerobic energy system, we need to work between 15 to 45 seconds and operate at 80 to 95% of our max heart rate. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to improve your running speed, we want to enhance running economy, and it increases your capacity and tolerance of that anaerobic metabolism, which is essentially a sciencey phrase for the demands of the game. Okay, and that type of session looks as follows. You'd start at the halfway, you'd run from the halfway across the 25-yard line, then turn and run to the far 25-yard line, and then turn and finish at the halfway line. Okay, and again, this one operates on a timer where we go on the minute every minute, and the aim is to complete this in 20 seconds, and then you would get 40 seconds rest. The rep distance we're covering per rep here is 92 meters, and you'll see compared to the previous session that this is now operating at a faster speed and a higher heart rate. Okay, so we're getting we're getting essentially 2 turns here. So we're turning slightly less, but we're turning at faster speed. So we've got to decelerate at a much faster speed and re-accelerate at a much faster speed, which again is more beneficial for the sport of hockey, because in theory we could operate and run in a straight line at this intensity for 20 seconds and rest for 40 seconds, but we don't get the specific sport adaptation that we do compared to when we do these turns. So for this session, I want you to perform 5 reps back to back, take a 3-minute break, and do this for 3 sets in total. Again, once you've done a sufficient warm up, this session itself only takes 20 minutes. So again, we've got 2 different types of running sessions here. We've got one high speed running session, which we then will want to do early in the week. And then we've got one tempo running session, which we want to do in the middle of the week. Both of them are only 20 minutes long once a warm-up has been completed. And again, I must emphasize that you do a good warm-up and mimic the warm-up you've done on the pitch. Once those 2 sessions have been completed, for those who like doing their longer runs, then I suggest doing a steady state cardio session towards the end of the week. And that can be a run or a jog or a cycle that's greater than 45 minutes. So again, if possible, do not replace any of the previous sessions, like the high speed running session or the tempo running session, with a steady state cardio session. And I know like steady state cardio sessions they may seem like it includes more volume and you'd cover more distance, but the intensity and the change of direction simply doesn't expose you to the demands of the other sessions. And again, what I'm not trying to say is that going out for a 5K jog or run or a 10K, jog or run or cycle is a bad thing. The reason we like to do them, I know the reason I like to do them is it's a nice, simple form of exercise, particularly from getting into the right headspace, sticking on some earphones, and it's just really easy to do. And it's totally okay to do a session like that. But as long as we don't think that that is sufficient for a conditioning stimulus to keep us fit for the demands of hockey. So if we want to return after the next 5-6 weeks and reduce risk factors of injury, this type of session is fine to do as long as we're getting the other two types of sessions in, or at the very least even getting one of them in. But if we don't do that and we just do some straight line running and straight line jogging, you do fall into, I can't guarantee you will get injured, but you fall into that high risk category of getting injured. So the last section, when it comes to staying motivated during this phase, which can be tough, particularly because we've come out of a lockdown, we've been able to get back to team training, and now we're back into this remote setting. A few tips that I think can help you are as follows. Um, in the simplest fashion, exercise daily. Even getting out for a 20-minute walk will count. Okay, so if you feel like you can't get one of those specific sessions in, getting out for a 20-minute walk will really help your mindset. Keep yourself accountable, even if that means by completing just one sport-specific session per week. That one session, in my opinion, is better than either just doing a 5K jog or doing nothing that week at all. So if you can try keep yourself accountable and just do one a week, that is better than doing even one 5K session. Try now work on your hydration habits. So try increase the amount of water you drink. And try get creative amongst your individual teams. Okay, you can do some simple things like some Zoom cooking classes, where you could nominate one or two players to start off. They cook a meal. You give a time limit of say 12 minutes, so a time cap. They've got to cook something in that 12-minute time cap, and then they nominate someone for the following week. Okay, I've done this in school, and it became very, very competitive, and it was a lot of fun. Okay, another thing you could do is attach point system, which you can post within your team WhatsApp groups for the different types of running sessions. So you can allocate more points for the high speed running session, a little bit less for the interval session, and something just below that then again for the steady state session. And players can submit the amount of points they're building either themselves, or you can create a competition sheet and put someone in charge of that, and that can help create accountability for the different types of sessions you're doing. And again, you'll see by attaching higher points to the sessions that are more specific, you have the ability to improve your score on the leaderboard. And even doing 20 minutes of movement-based activity once per week really, really helps. And I've actually created something with Fuse to provide that, not just for the Fuse members, that anyone can actually have access to. So it actually starts tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So if you follow Fuse Training on Instagram, every Friday at 10 a.m., there's a yoga class. And that will be saved on their IGTV channel. So even if you can't make it at 10 a.m., you can do that later on. And that'll happen once per week, every week over the next 6 weeks. There's also a 20-minute short high-intensity workout that's done on a Monday, and a 20-minute live cooking class with a top-class nutritionist called Greg Xavier on a Wednesday. So there's some, giving Fuse Training a little plug here, but there's some stuff that you can do if you feel like you're not too motivated to go out and get running, by even getting some mindfulness with the yoga class done once a week, or getting a high intensity session from home in once a week, and getting some inspiration for your cooking. If you're going to do a Zoom cooking class amongst your teams, you can get some really cool inspiration from Greg on Wednesdays as well. So look, guys, hopefully that has covered the questions that were sent in to me. I hope I've given you something and some content that you can go away and work with over the next couple of weeks. But I want to open the floor to any questions in the event that either A, I haven't answered the questions that have been sent in to the level that you want, or any additional questions that are out there that you want to ask. I'll take that silence as there are no questions. and that I've answered them all, or is everyone still present with me?
Yeah, we're here. Thanks for Sami.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yes, Sami, I suppose just to say thanks so much, and also if anyone does have questions after this, that if they can send it to their captains or anything like that, and we can put them to you. And again, you know, if there's stuff to do something like this again, we can always have a chat about doing that as well.
Yeah, more than happy to do that.
Perfect. Lovely stuff.